So I'm Andrew Grillos, guys. I'm a signature fly tyer for Idlewild Flies, Sims Guide Ambassador, and among all the places I've guided around the world, Gunnison is home. I guide in the Black Canyon of Gunnison, and I guess I'm just going to share some of my fly patterns that I've come up with over the years, and they're ones that Idlewild is producing, and kind of just talk about some of the things I've done and about fishing the Gunnison. I definitely like questions, and I'd rather have you guys talk to me than I just talk at you the whole time, so feel free to chime in. So that's the fat caddis right there. I like that fat Albert fly. When that thing came out a few years ago, I saw that. Actually, a client brought that with him to Chile, and that was the first time I saw one of those. I thought it looked like a great idea, but I think it left a lot to be desired. It was kind of hard to see, and it really didn't float that well, despite being a foam hopper. And so I kind of took that idea and shrunk it down, and made it into a little caddis, or a kind of just general attractor terrestrial guy here. And this might be my best fly from New Zealand, actually, because it's not super flashy. It's not going to scare a fish that might be kind of spooky. And it's got that nice segmented foam body, which kind of sits a little bit lower in the water, which I think gives the fish a nice view of it. And an improvement that I made to it after fishing this pattern in New Zealand a bunch was to put a little bit of that neon pink yarn in it, because I was having a tough time tracking this fly some days. And this guy I like to tie on a Tiemco 3761. It's one of my favorite hooks. It's a, I don't know, I think a 2x or 3x long nymph hook, and it's a little bit heavier wire. Something that you need to take into account when you're tying dry flies, I think, is actually the weight of your hook does matter. You don't just want to tie on any old light wire hook, because that hook actually acts as a keel. It's a little counterbalance that's going to assist your fly in floating upright every time. And it's not so heavy that it's going to make this thing sink. So the Tiemco 100 is not always the best dry fly hook. Sometimes it's too light, and then your fly is going to float on its side. And again, like the last fly, I just start off and lay down a nice tight thread base. Okay, so width-wise, that looks good to me. This is going to form our overbody in a couple minutes. And for my tie-in here, I like to cut this to a little point. And that's just, it makes for a less bulky tie-in. There's going to be less material cranked down underneath your thread. So, one loose wrap, and we're going to work it kind of tight, and just bury all of this in there. Right about there. Okay, so there's step one. And I'm just going to lay this right on top. Take one wrap right in there and work it nice and tight again. A couple wraps will hold that in place. Then I'm just going to make a series of X's working my way back to create a little segmented foam body. So what I did right there, you can see, I kind of worked my way back. I'm going to create another slightly smaller segment and do the same thing. Got the second one. And we'll probably do a third one right there. That ought to do the trick. Kind of move the foam and position it as you tighten down. Good, so I've got a nice tapered body there. And then to get my thread back to where I need to be, which is where I began, I just do the opposite. So I'm going to create a series of X's. So there's one. There's the second one. There's our third one. Right like that. So that's how you create that kind of Fat Albert styled segmented body. And I'm going to take and trim this back right like that. And I'm going to leave it kind of long, because that'll create our fourth segment. The next step is to pull this piece of foam over it. And that's going to create our little overbody. Kind of tighten her down. Yeah, that's the idea. So, segmented underbody, nice looking overbody there. Next step, I'm going to go ahead and tie in a wing. Okay, so we've got our first wing. I'm just going to line it up just a little bit longer than my body there. Pinch it, take a wrap, and kind of crank it down into that little slot there. That looks good. And I want this to flare as well to create a nice fluttering profile, something like that. And now I'm just going to leave that just like it is and pull everything out of the way and go underneath and advance my thread to just about the front end of my hook shank there. I'm going to pull this first layer of foam and create another segment in it. Maybe just a couple wraps there, that'll be good. Pull this next layer of foam and tie a segment there as well. Right like that. Maybe one more to hold it. Good. So we've got our front segment created. Now what I'm going to do is just get all these tag ends of the elk hair out of the way. Good. So what we've got there is kind of like our little elk hair caddis wing. I try to cut those tag ends as close as I can there because I'm going to stack another wing right on top of it. So we'll get those cut nice and close and pick a similarly sized bunch of elk hair for the next layer in our little wing. So we've got another little clump of elk hair. I'm just going to do about a similar length of wing and tie it in just like I did previously. Kind of work it in there. What's that?
What size is it?
This thing? This fat caddis, probably a 12 and a 14 mostly, what I'm tying right now. I didn't really mess around with little tiny flies too much in New Zealand either. I definitely worked some really selective fish where as a last resort, you know, I ended up throwing like some little size 20 emerger at them and finally they came over and ate. But a lot of the fish down there, I think, are so used to eating kind of larger terrestrials, larger mayflies, that stuff like this is a great insect to have, or a great imitation. So you can see how those two wings kind of stack up together there and just form a nice profile, nice little fluttering wing. And I'm going to leave these tag ends just a little bit longer on the front there, like that or so. And those little tag ends, just like on your elk hair caddis, are going to capture a little air bubble when you're fishing it. So again, it just naturally makes it more buoyant. Our next and almost last step to this fly, I'm going to tie in more of this neon yarn so you guys can see it out there. There's nothing worse than wondering where your fly is, and then you see a fish rise and think, oh, that was probably my fly. So if you can keep track of what you're fishing, it works out a whole lot better. I'm just going to tie this yarn right on top in there. Just a couple nice tight wraps, maybe 3 right there, that'll hold her. And I'm going to go ahead and trim this yarn on the front about even with those tag ends. And again, I want this just slightly shorter than my wing, just so it's a little pink dot on the water, which is a little bit easier for you to track while you're fishing it out there. Okay, so what I'm going to do, where my thread's hanging out there, is just tie these legs in on either side. So there's the one on my side.
Here's something new for you to try.
Alright. Okay. I'll just spin this to get a few wraps worked in there, crank it down. And like I did before, I'm just going to pull everything out of the way and kind of work a couple wraps in right behind the eye there. Take my half hitch tool, because I kind of crowded the eye here again, and kind of use that to push the material out of the way and slide your half hitches right where they need to go. Okay. And now we're just going to trim this foam about even with those tips of the elk hair. About like that. So that is the fat caddis right there. Pretty simple. I mean, that's only 4 pieces. You know, the body, the wing, the indicator, and the legs. A great segmented profile. That little fluttering wing on it. That's a pretty versatile little fly right there. That guy's done really well for me all over the world.